Amen. Thank you, thank you. All right. How many of y'all know it's a good thing that it rained? Who has a yard? All right. We could be in California. So be happy for the rain. The rain is a blessing. So for those that stayed home because of the rain, now why would I say something like that? Because it's probably true. Amen. All right. So hopefully you're watching me live when I said that. Bedside Baptist. All right. I don't think we had any first timers. I saw Donica's daddy is here. He's here. Probably looking at the decorations in the back to make sure we're still on point. No, he did a lot of. All right, y'all make me nervous when people knock on that door.
Be too nervous.
Okay. Oh, no, I'm worried about that. All right, so we're in the book of Romans. So if you'll find Romans, find the 11th chapter and find verse 11. Romans 11, find verses 11 through 24. When you found it, please stand for the reading. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Certainly not. But through their fall, to provoke them to jealousy, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Now, if their fall is riches for the world and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry, if by any means I may provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh and save some of them. For if their being cast away is the reconciling of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? For if the first fruit is holy, the lump is also holy, and if the root is holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches were broken off, and you being a wild olive tree were grafted in among them, and with them became a partaker of the root and fatness of the olive tree, do not boast against the branches. But if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Well said. Because of unbelief they were broken off. And you stand by faith. Do not be haughty, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he may not spare you either. Therefore, consider the goodness and severity of God, and severity of God. On those who fell, severity, but towards you, goodness, if you continue in his goodness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in unbelief, will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these who are natural branches be grafted into their own olive trees? Amen. Amen. You may be seated. All right, we got some little ones. Why don't you escort them to, no, we don't have juice crew today. No, you don't have to. We're good. All right. Okay, so we are back again in the book of Romans, and I know what you're saying. Well, we've been in Romans a long time. Rome wasn't built in a day. All right? And we're not going to go through the book in a day or 2 days or 3. But if you'll look, we're getting kind of towards the end. I find it quite interesting that we're going to take a look at respect for Israel today, considering what's going on in our country today. There is a parallel here. So just keep that in mind and keep praying for this country. Pray for its leaders. Stop complaining. Start praying. And then realize God is in charge. And we'll be okay. All right, so when we look at Israel and we look at what Paul is doing here, what he's trying to tell us, he's indicating to us something very fundamental that I don't think that I really fully expressed to you in the last sermon. So I want you to get this now. When Paul began chapter 11 in a state of distress, he was distressing over all of his Israelite brethren, all of his Jewish brethren that were going to reject God, that had rejected God. But he said that there was a remnant. Now, I want y'all to catch this. The true Israelite is in the remnant. Okay? That's the true. The true Israelite is not an Israelite because of a physical birth, but because of their spiritual birth. Which means that you and I are also a part of that group. And we're going to find out how God pulls this off, because we're going to talk about something called grafting. And it's a wonderful thing, because for Paul, even though he's grieving over those that would be lost, and he says he would actually give his life for them, he also acknowledges that God, through his sovereignty and his election, has actually kept a remnant in place. And because of that remnant, you and I are going to be, quote, grafted in so that we can actually partake of what God was trying to give to Israel. Now, the question then comes up again, what is God doing with Israel and this remnant? Is he punishing Israel, or is he disciplining Israel? There is a difference between discipline and punishment, and I gave it to you in your handouts. Let's go over those real quick. Discipline is the practice of training someone to behave in accordance with rules or a code of behavior. You're supposed to discipline your children. Right? All right. To punish is to inflict suffering for the past behavior. Let me help you. Going to hell is punishment. Right? Suffering because of disobedience is discipline. What's going on with the remnant is God is disciplining them because, watch this, God has said that they were going to be a kingdom one day and Christ would reign in that kingdom. Therefore, there has to be a remnant. There has to be a real Israel. Now, we get to reign with them, but it is going to be a Jewish kingdom. And if you'll just embrace that for a second, Paul is going to give us an explanation of how this works that is going to seem very complicated, and you're going to have to listen carefully as I go through it. But you'll grab it, and when you grab it, you're going to see the simplicity of what God is doing. Now, question. How many of y'all have watched, people like Parker and the little group that goes back into the nursery? Cameron, Keenan, Aiden, Max, Mia. How many of y'all watch them? I'm talking about other than the parents. Y'all watched it? And they're like, they mad now.
I know.
But it's a cool thing. They're like a lot of kids. If you ever notice this, a child will play with a toy until they get tired of it, right? Then they put it down. They go on to the next toy. But what happens when another kid picks up the toy that they put down? What do? They go, mine. They no longer want the toy that they have. They want the one that they put down that they don't want anymore because now they see somebody else having fun with it. That's Israel. Israel was given the oracles of God, the prophets. They were given the Old Testament, the law, and they rejected that when Christ came and basically put it all down. And what Paul is going to tell us here is that by us picking it up, Gentiles, we will provoke them to jealousy like a little kid, and they're going to want to come and get their toy back. That's his hope. So what we see here is two things in verses 11 through 15. First of all, the Jews needed to be reminded of what they were missing. And secondly, the Gentiles needed the gospel to come to them. Two things were needed. The Jews needed to be reminded of what they had, and we needed to have it. So in verse 11, he says, and we went over this last week, but real quickly, I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? It's a rhetorical question. Certainly not. Now, here's the thing. Did they stumble? They did stumble. At what? At Christ. Did they fall? Not permanently. It's not permanent. But through their fall, their temporary fall, the fact that they put it down, but they're going to come back, to provoke them to jealousy, that's the jealousy part, salvation has come to the Gentiles. The Greek word for jealousy there is not just a feeling. It is a desire. It is an envy. They want it back. He says, I want to provoke them to jealousy because salvation has come to the Gentiles, which means as Gentiles, what we've done is we've taken God's salvation and we're living with all of what that means. And now the Jews are looking at us saying, we want what you got because it was given to us first. So verse 12, he says, now if their fall is riches for the world, because now the gospel is given to the world, and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? In other words, when they come back in, how great will that be? Put it to you like this. Imagine someone is having a birthday party and they have a large family, and the family is all that is invited to the birthday party. And they got music, they got cake, they got food, they got everything you can think of to make the party great. But the family members, for some reason, when the birthday individual shows up, get upset, don't really like what's going on, and they leave. Almost all of them, but a few of them stay. And as they walk out, they leave the door open, and there are people hanging out outside that hear the music and get curious and step in. And when they step in, they ask, looks like you got a lot of food. Looks like y'all having a good time, but it's just a few of y'all. Looks like y'all got enough for a bunch of us. And the family that's left said, come on in. Now, the family that walked away, they decided to go to the club, have another party. But when they got to the club, they realized the food wasn't right. The music wasn't the same. And they actually do miss that family member that they were celebrating. So guess what? They go back to the party. Now, when they get back to the party, guess what everybody says? When they come back, come on in. Now you got more people celebrating, and the birthday person is happier because more people are celebrating. That is exactly what is going on. The Jews have left Christ. Not all of them, but they left the door open. And Gentiles heard the music. And we've walked into the party. And we're having a good time. Now, the rest of them Jews that left, they're out there right now trying to find a good time. And when you read the Bible, you find out they're going to realize, I can't find a good time out here. And then they're going to come back. And when they come back, what a wonderful, great, beautiful thing. We call it the millennial kingdom, and we'll all be together, right? So that's what he's pointing to, and that's what he's saying. This is what you're looking at. So in verse 13, he says, here's what I want you to understand. He says, for I speak to you Gentiles. Inasmuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry. He says, in as much as that I come to you, he says, I'm going to magnify. You know what that means? That means I'm going to blow it up, make it bigger so you can see it better, my ministry. If by any means I may provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh and save some of them. So I want you to get what Paul is saying from his perspective. Paul says, I keep on going into place after place, and I go to the synagogue first, and have the Jews reject me. Then I go over to the, I'm gonna change mics. No, it's not. And so they said that, so Paul says, I go in and I try to tell the Gentiles I try to tell the Jews what's going on, but they reject me. Then I go to the Gentiles, and the Jews get mad at me for going to the Gentiles. See, I magnify what I'm doing, and then I tell the Jews, you're going to hell, and they are going to heaven. I tell the Jews, you don't have God, and they do. I magnify my ministry. Verse 14, if by any means I may provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh and save some of them. You know why he said some of them? Because there's always a remnant. Now, I want you to understand how Paul is looking at this whole concept of election here. He knows God is elected, but look at what Paul says. Paul says, if I were to look at this from the perspective that a lot of people do, I would never say anything to my Jewish brethren because they're lost. But what I do know is God has a remnant, so I'm going to keep on talking to them so I can get those who are, some of them, that are going to actually come into the family of faith. So I'm going to keep doing it. Verse 15, for if their being cast away is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? That's what he's saying. If the world can walk into that door and walk into the party, those that have left, what happens when they come back? It's a great thing because they've actually come back. So now Paul, who started out by saying he was so saddened by what was going on, is now saying, but I have hope. I have hope that God in his sovereignty has made a way for my brothers and my sisters who are the actual blood-related relatives of Abraham. So we get to number 3 because Paul, after saying that, now this is where we get to what I told you is going to get a little complex. Because Paul wants the Gentiles to understand something. See, when they came in the party, and they had a good time in the party. This is the kid that when they got the toy and the other kid now is looking at them and is jealous. Have y'all ever noticed that the kid with the toy looks at the one that now wants the toy back, puts it behind his back, or waves it at him, right? Yeah, basically, taunts them, teases them. He's saying, Gentiles, don't you do that, because you don't understand how this all took place. I'm going to tell you why Paul is writing this. You see it in the early church. If you study church history, what you will find is the early Christians back in the day of Paul were condemning Jews. They were looking down on them. They were talking about them. They were downright getting after them. They were like, you killed Jesus. Y'all are just bad. Y'all are wrong. It's terrible. They went after the Jews like crazy. So Paul begins to write here, and Paul says basically to the Gentiles, you need to have respect for the Jews because the Jews provide access to eternal life. You need to have some respect. So he's going to talk about olive trees. The reason he's going to talk about olive trees is because when writing to the Romans, everyone in the Mediterranean world understood olive trees. Everyone really understood how they worked. So let me tell you what happened with olive trees so you can understand what Paul is saying. So, olive trees, you had good ones and you had wild ones. The good ones were grown in a grove. Y'all know what a grove is? All right. They'd be about 25 feet apart because their roots go so far, so down, and so wide. And so these would produce a lot of fruit. Then you had wild olive trees. They were growing out there in the middle of nowhere. They had strong roots, but they didn't produce any fruit. They were not really good for anything. However, the good olive trees sometimes didn't get the kind of moisture that they needed to get, or something was going on in dry conditions. And the wild olive trees had stronger roots. So what they would do is they would look at the good olive tree and they would take a branch off of it and they would go to the wild olive tree and they would actually, for lack of a better term, they would cut it in the middle and kind of split it open and they'd stick the branch down off in the middle right there. And what would and they put some kind of a paste or wax on it to hold it there. And eventually it would connect and grow. And so it would get nutrients from the roots of the wild olive tree, but because it was a good branch, it would produce fruit, thereby producing more fruit. Now, y'all got that? Y'all understand what grafting is? Watch what Paul says, though. Verse 16. For if the first fruit, now the first fruit that he's talking about here is probably talking about the Jewish patriarchs. It could have been the first Jewish Christians. But the first fruit, the whole concept of first fruit is simple. That is that when you have a harvest, what comes out first will tell you what the rest of the harvest is going to be. And for the Jewish people, they really understood this because whatever they got first, they took that and gave it back to God as show of their appreciation for what's about to come. So he says, for if the first fruit, if it's the patriarchs or the early Jewish Christians, is holy, the lump is also holy, which means that what's going to come from it is holy. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. So he says, now, if the root is holy, then it's all good, and the branches are actually good. So let me help you. This good tree is Israel. All right? So what he's saying, that Israel has some strong roots. They're called Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's saying Israel has some strong nutrients that are going. It's called the law and the prophets. Israel has what is good and what is holy. And so the branches from Israel that produce fruit are good branches. That's what he's saying. Now watch this. Verse 17. And if some of the branches were broken off, this is the discipline. Broken off is pruning. Do you know why you prune? You prune dead branches. You prune what is not useful, and you actually make sure that the nutrients get to what is good. So if there's something that is bad, you cut it off. So with the good tree, with Israel, God does some pruning. You say, well, what kind of pruning is it? What he's doing is those that reject him, reject Christ, reject all of that, he cuts them off. Does that make sense? They can't be part of the tree. He cuts them off. All right? That's called discipline because Israel, the remnant, is still left. And you, who is you? Verse 13, for I speak to you Gentiles, us. Catch this. And you, being a wild olive tree, so we're the wild olive tree, were grafted in among them. The process is reversed here. I want y'all to catch this. The process is reversed. What he says is, what I've done then is I've gone to the wild olive tree and I've taken a branch, that's the Gentiles, and what I've done is I've come over to the good olive tree, split it down the middle, and I've set the Gentiles, the wild branch, off in it, put the paste on, so now that it's grafted into the good tree. Y'all got to follow this, because you wouldn't do it this way. He's reversing this. They would have said, why is he reversing this? He says, so you were grafted in among them. Who are they? They are holy and good. And with them become a partaker of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. So he says, Gentiles now have access to the same nutrients that the Israelites have access to. But before you jump up and down and shout, did we not just see that some of the branches that had access to that nutrient were dead? In their disbelief, even though they had access, did they not get cut off? The reason I'm pointing this out is he's not saying that the grafting in is the salvation. He's saying the grafting in is the access. As a Gentile, I have access to what the Jews had access to so that I could be saved. By the way, this is interesting. You do grafting with all kinds of trees. If you take a pear tree and an apple tree, and if you graft in a branch from the pear tree into the apple tree, guess what kind of fruit's going to come off the grafted branch? What kind of branch did I say got grafted in? Pear. It's going to still produce pears. the branch doesn't change. It still produces what it was producing before. The only thing is it's now getting its nutrients from the apple tree. The reason I point that out is because there is a difference between Israel and the church. Keep the difference. All right? We didn't get grafted in and become Jews. All right? The Jews have a promise. They got a special place. There's a pause on the Jews right now. That's all, just a pause. They got a promise. They got a promise of a kingdom. They have a special place. Another way of putting it, if you watched the Cowboys the other night, they played the first half. They looked great. It was wonderful. But it wasn't prophesied that they would win, which we don't care because it was preseason. But at halftime, they went off the field. And there was a show of some kind at halftime on the field. We're the halftime show. That's the church. We're the band. That's what we are. This is the Super Bowl. This is years ago. We Prince. I say that for Brother LaCarvo. We're Prince coming out to perform. For you Beyonce fans, that's who it is. But that's who we are. We are the entertainment at halftime because there is a universal cosmic game going on. And the church is the halftime show because we get to come in for a little while and then we get to leave. Because the second half, a whole lot of mess is going to happen in the second half. You know, the second half gets rough. The first half looked bad, but the second half gets rough. And you know what? We don't have to stay for that. We get to go back up in the stands and watch it. That's what we call the rapture. That terminology. We get taken away. Isn't that a wonderful thing? I think when you read Revelation, I always say, when you get to all that bad stuff, keep reminding yourself, I ain't going to be here. I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be here. This is what I get to see. So that's what's going on here. We are these wild branches. We don't change. We don't become Israel, but we get their nutrients and we get access. That'll help you understand what's coming. Because watch what he says in verse 18. Do not boast against the branches. Now, the branches that he's talking about here are because they've been pruned, and let's just say that we're looking down at them. They've been pruned. They're dead. He says, don't boast against them. Don't start talking about them. Don't mistreat them. Don't act crazy with them. Because first of all, how did you get access in the first place? Did you ask for it? No. Where were you at? You were with the wild tree. What was going to be done with the wild tree? Nothing. It was going to be thrown away. You were literally thrown away. Who put you in the good tree? God did. He grafted you in. Therefore, if God grafted you in, why would you turn around and look at the tree and everything that's going along with it and start to talk about it like it's something wrong with it? Why would you mistreat it? Why would you get anti-Semitic? That's the dumbest thing in the world to do. Because if it were not for them, you would not be grafted. And if you were not grafted, you would not have salvation. It's the craziest, dumbest thing in the world to do. And people do it all the time. And Christians have it bad. We blame the Jews for the death of Christ. Come on now. First of all, they couldn't help themselves. It was prophesied. It was a part of God's sovereign electability that he had this take place. It had to be done. Jesus didn't show up and say, guess what? It might or might not happen. He said, I'm going to die. So we can't get mad at the Jews. Watch this. We can't get mad at the Romans either. Because they actually did the crucifying. But we can't get mad at them either. And that's part of our problem. Because what's going on here, he's saying you're all equally messed up. Whether you're Jew or Gentile, you're equally messed up. Everybody needs God. Everybody needs God. See, I can solve the problem that is going on right here in this country right today. I'm about to solve it. Everybody needs God. Everybody needs God. Nobody is better than anybody else. Nobody is special in any way, shape, or form. I don't care what anybody has to say. At the end of the day, hell is real and everybody should go there. So everybody's equally messed up. Everybody's in the same boat and everybody is in need. So he says here, don't boast against the branches. But if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. Now, you see where it says, but if you do boast? He's not saying go ahead and boast. He's saying if you're stupid enough to try and boast, if you're dumb enough to try and point your finger at the Jews, if you're crazy enough to try to talk about Hebrew people, he's saying, get this in order. They ain't somebody that you support and you hold up. They're not here because of you. You're here because of them. That is crazy. That's like cutting off your own legs. Understand where your support comes from. So then, lastly, Gentiles, please beware of anti-Semitism. How does it happen? Now, I'm going to show you, this is how you get into the kind of mess that happens all over the world right today in all kinds of ways. When you're not aware of the situation that confronts all of us, you start to try and pick and choose. Because you're not aware that everybody's in the same boat. For some reason, you think some are here and some are there. When in actuality, at the end, we're all in this together. Because we got grafted in. We're all in this together. We all have the same access. But there are some people, they just think some people are better off than others, and it's kind of crazy. Because verse 19, he says, you will say, then branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. You know what they're saying? They're like, look, I got grafted in, but branches, he broke off some branches so that I could be grafted in. So obviously, they were messed up bad and wrong. Surely, I can boast a little bit. I like the way Paul says this. Well said. But then he says, let me explain it to you. Because of unbelief, they were broken off. I want you to catch what Paul says. Paul says, well, you got to understand this. They were broken off because of unbelief. They weren't broken off because of you. They weren't broken off to make room for you. They were broken off because they didn't believe. So while you're sitting there saying, they got broken off and I got grafted in when they were broken off, well said. They rejected and then the gospel came to you. But you got to understand something. They did not get broken off because of you. They got broken off because of their own unbelief. It ain't got nothing to do with you. It's not because God liked you. And you stand by faith. Uh-oh. That's why I say you got to be real understanding of what Paul is saying. That's why I said it's just access. Paul is saying that the only way you stay grafted, the only way that you stay in this holiness, the only way that you get heaven is that you got to stand by faith. Now, do you understand that it's by God's grace? All right. We're that wild olive branch that didn't deserve anything to do with any kind of salvation. And God grafts us into what he had given Israel so that we have access. That's all by his grace. Salvation is given by grace. And then he says the only way you can have it is through your faith. That grace is man's look at God to say to God, you know what? If it were not for you, I wouldn't have it. Therefore, it's all on you. And then the faith is man's way of receiving it. That's man's responsibility. And what Paul is saying is, before you jump off on this whole election and all of this stuff that goes on of who's got what going on, understand this. At the end of the day, salvation is given by grace and you receive it through your faith. And if you don't have faith, I don't care about the grafting because something's going to happen. He says in verse 20, because they were broken off, he says, and you stand by faith. Do not be haughty, but fear. You better be fearful. For if God did not spare the natural branches, do y'all see natural? If God was willing to cut off what was supposed to be there, all right, he may not spare you either. Why? Because you weren't a natural branch. You're grafted in. You're from something else. As a Gentile, what I got to understand is if God was willing to get his own people that he picked out and chose there, that when he grafted me in as a Gentile and said, now you have faith in me, if I don't have faith, he's going to cut me off too. I'm no different than them. Because if he was willing to do it to them, he's willing to do it to me. Here's Paul's overall point. Let me explain to you his overall point. First of all, the whole rejection aspect of Israel is a temporary thing. It's not all of them. It's just some of them. So these unbelieving Jews are not part of the tree. They're not part of that remnant. They're not part of what we're getting grafted into. But the good olive tree has these beautiful roots. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the patriarchs. You got all of the prophets that you see. You've got the law. You've got all of those beautiful books in the Old Testament, all that stuff. That's why if you read the New Testament and never read the Old Testament, you'll never understand the New Testament, because the New Testament gets everything that it has from the Old Testament. That's why the New Testament repeats the Old Testament over and over and over. I mean, it's impossible to understand the New Testament without the Old Testament, right? And so he's saying, with that in mind, please understand that what you've been grafted into gives you the opportunity to be saved. Some of those branches got pruned away because they rejected him. And that allowed room for us to be grafted in. But the wild olive tree has unfruitful branches as well. As a matter of fact, the wild olive tree is not fruitful at all. I want y'all to catch this. And just because we got grafted in doesn't mean that we changed. We are still Gentile. We are still wild. We just now have access. This should help you to understand why God has to have his Holy Spirit come in and fix us. Why God has to have his Holy Spirit come in and show us and help us to repent. Why my salvation is wrapped up in God and not me. Why I have to say to God, thank you for the graft, and then thank you for letting me know that I was grafted, and then thank you for giving me the faith to stay grafted and not be cut away. It's all about thanking you. And if I'm thanking you, I don't have time to look at the Jews and say anything bad about them. Matter of fact, if I'm real honest about it, if I have all of this thanks in me for what you've done for me, I don't have time to look at anyone, no matter where they're from. Because if they're a Jew, I owe them. And if they're Gentile, they just as messed up and grafted in like I am. So this whole mess we got going on with pigmentation is downright stupid. It is. God has just painted a beautiful picture. A beautiful picture. 5 colors. I'm telling you, they're 5. 5 colors of dirt. And then we all get to come up in one of these beautiful colors of dirt, blended. Some of us are blended. Yes, blended. It's a beautiful blend, but beautiful. And here we come as Gentiles with the crazy thought process that says, for some reason, we don't understand God grafted us into the Jews and put us in a position where we could all have access to eternal life. And we're so busy looking at temporary things that we're trying to jockey for a position that ain't even there. It's the craziest thing out there. It's downright dumb. So I like what he says here when he says, for if God did not spare the natural branches, he may not spare you either. Therefore, verse 22, consider the goodness and severity of God. So what he's saying here, look at his goodness. He grafted people in. Look at his severity. He cuts people off. On those who fell, severity. But toward you here is those of you that are believers, goodness. If you continue in his goodness, this means if you're truly have faith and truly saved, otherwise you will be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in unbelief, will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. And we know this happens because when we get to the book of Revelation, guess what happens to Israel? God takes away the blindness from their eyes, opens it up for them, and they suddenly go, yes, Jesus is the Messiah. And they get grafted back in. So them branches that we're looking at that have fallen, they get to come back in. They come back into the party. So he says in verse 24, for if it were not, if you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to the nature into a cultivated olive tree, you're still the same branch, by the way. How much more will these who are natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? They will be restored. And by the way, you want them to be restored, because God says when Israel is restored, that's going to happen when Jesus comes back. See, the second coming is the restoration of Israel. I think church folks thinks the second coming is him coming for us. No, that's not the second coming. That's the rapture. When he comes for his bride, the church, he takes us away. He's not coming all the way back to the earth. We want the second coming. Let me tell you why we want the second coming. Because in order for the second coming to take place, first of all, I get taken out of here. And I don't know about you, but I'm kind of tired of here. I'm just a little tired of here. I realized that yesterday watching TV. I got kind of tired. I said, it's the same mess every day. I don't care what channel I flip it on. It's the same mess every day. Same junk every day. And I realized it was Saturday. And I was thinking, I'm like, man, when I was growing up, they used to sing a song. And they would talk about the Sabbath having no end. Mine do. Mine have an end. But then I realized they were talking about that day of rest that was coming, that wouldn't end. I'm like, mine has an end. Matter of fact, I got up Saturday morning from rest. I'd been sleeping Friday night. I was resting. I got up Saturday morning. I got my coffee, and I cut the TV on. And I'll admit it, I watched the news. I flipped on something called AM Joy. It wasn't no joy. It was just mess. Where's the joy, Joy? Ain't no joy, it's just mess. Then on my Saturday, I realized Adrian needed help, so we got to go help. Trent's about to start school. I got to go take her to a rally. Then we got to go show grandmama where the school is, and then we got to go help Adrian with her class and get all of that stuff together. Now I got blisters on my hands. We were there all day. I'm like, where's my rest? Where's my rest? I don't like it here. I don't like it here. I just wanted some rest. And then here it is Sunday. I get up. I come to church. Now, it's a joy to get up and be able to come. It is. It's wonderful. That's a beautiful thing. But I realized I got to go work tomorrow. I got to get back in it tomorrow. You know, I mean, does it not stop? And it dawned on me, do I not sound like Solomon in Ecclesiastes? Does it ever stop? Is this endless cycle going to keep on going and going and going? There's the answer to that. Until he comes. It's going to keep going and going and going. I shouldn't have time to look at other people and have a problem with them. I got enough going on right now. I don't want to be here. I want the restoration of Israel to take place. That's what I really want, because I know that I get to be taken away. I get to be changed in the twinkling of an eye. I get a new name. There's some wonderful stuff that's going to take place. I get to be a part of the bride that marries the bridegroom, and then I get to come back with Jesus as he conquers all of the evil in the world, and then I get to spend 1,000 years reigning with him. I'm ready for the restoration of Israel. I want to see it all play out. I want to be on that side of things. Matter of fact, I'm waiting on the great white throne. Because I won't have to walk up to it. I'm going to be behind it. That right there, that keeps me going. That's how I get up every day, because I know that this mess is temporary. It's temporary. So 3 things to take away from what Paul is saying here. First of all, God has no respect of person. Y'all get that? God has, now I want y'all to catch that second part that I put there. All are equally bad. All are equally bad. Because the reason I say that is that's the only way you're going to understand grace. God has no respect of person. We're all equally bad, so his grace falls on all of us the same. There is no difference, Jew or Gentile. All come by grace. God's sovereignty through faith, man's responsibility. And lastly, therefore, neither Jew nor Gentile is better than the other. God picked them so that he could make them into that tree. But they're not better than us, and we're not better than them. This is how God designed it. And if you don't like the way God designed it, well, let me help you. And then I'll quit. But let me help you. If you have a problem with the way that God goes about doing things, and if you decided to make up your own reality, like those people that run around here, it's funny because I see them all the time. One of them's going to probably say something to me on Facebook. But these people run around here talking about they're Hebrews. When you're not. Because you ain't. And you can't. And you couldn't be. It's an impossibility. All right? You just ain't. Let me help you. Because you're not. You can't. You ain't. If you don't like the way God did things, stop making up alternate realities. All right? Stop it. Because here's the deal. Think of it this way. God is an artist. And he's made this beautiful, vast painting. This is for my atheist friends, too. He's made this beautiful, vast painting. The problem is, see, because we're in the painting, we can't see the painting. All we can see is the part we're in. Have you ever walked up to a painting and just put your face right up on it and only seen that little part? You know what you're not going to see? Beauty. Matter of fact, you might see something that you go, this is just ugly. This is ridiculous. Because you can't see the whole thing. And then you have the audacity to call it ugly and then turn around and tell the painter he made something ugly. When in fact, if you had his position, first of all, it's his painting. Secondly, he stepped back from it and he's looking at it in its totality. And as far as he's concerned, it's rather beautiful. And since beauty is in the eye of the beholder and you can't see it, you need to shut up and have faith that what he says is beautiful is beautiful. At the end of the day, what God has done, God did, and it is beautiful. What I love best about him is he's saying, just have faith, because in the end, I'm going to show you what I've done. And when I show you what I've done, you're going to say, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And you know, the sad part is he gave us this Bible and said, if you'll read it from cover to cover, you'll get a good piece of what I've done and you'll understand the beauty of it all. So again, no, you're not a Hebrew. All right, that tree we get grafted in. All right, that's good. We have access. Thank God we have access. And by the way, no one is better than another, and God knows exactly what he's doing. Let God be sovereign. God bless you. All right, let's come together. When you go out today and you see someone, what you want to look at and what you understand is what